All right, so today we're going to dive into some Texas-sized policy challenges and how they connect to some bigger issues all across the U.S.
Yeah.
And to do that, we've got this really interesting Q&A article, and it's got a lot of reader questions that really get to the heart of some things, things that I bet you've wondered about, too.
Yeah.
It covers transportation, energy, even education.
Yeah, it's a really cool snapshot, I think, of where we are and maybe where we might be headed. And I think you'll find that the reader concerns are spot on.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And they don't shy away from the tough stuff.
No.
So, for example, one reader asks about the future of transportation.
Okay.
Will it be all about self-driving cars?
Yeah.
Or can we make cities more walkable and transit-friendly?
Right.
Is it one or the other?
Yeah, it's tempting to think so, but the article really points out that most experts actually support both advancements in transportation technology and urban planning.
Oh, interesting.
They aren't mutually exclusive.
Okay.
The challenge really lies in implementation, especially considering existing infrastructure.
Right. And the article brings up a fascinating geographical point.
Yeah.
A lot of cities, especially west of the Mississippi, were designed around cars.
Yeah.
Making them walkable after the fact would be incredibly expensive and disruptive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a major factor in why autonomous vehicles are often presented as a more feasible near-term solution.
Okay.
At least in certain contexts. It's easier to integrate them into existing car-centric infrastructure.
But wouldn't that just perpetuate our reliance on cars even if they're driving themselves? What about investing in things like high-speed rail?
Yeah.
To truly transform how we move around?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that there are no easy solutions.
Right.
The article does mention the proposed Texas Trans Corridor maglev train, which would be a game changer if it ever gets built.
I mean,
imagine zipping from Dallas to Houston.
Oh my gosh.
In under an hour.
Yeah, that sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Right.
But you brought up a good point. If it ever gets built,
yeah,
these large-scale infrastructure projects face a ton of hurdles.
Right.
From funding to political will.
Yeah.
It's easy to get, caught up in the excitement of the new technology without considering the practicalities.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of massive societal shifts, let's talk energy.
Oh.
The reader questions get right to it.
Okay.
Can North America actually ditch fossil fuels? And if so, how?
Right.
And this is where things get even more complicated.
More complicated, you mean beyond Texas summers without air conditioning?
Okay.
I'm all ears.
So the article brings in an interesting concept from Vaclav Smil's book, How the World Really Works.
Okay.
Okay, so Smil argues that concrete, steel, plastic, and ammonia are essential for modern life. He calls them the 4 pillars of civilization.
The 4 pillars, okay, I follow so far, but I have a feeling there's a but coming.
You got it.
Yeah.
The catch is that all 4 of those materials rely heavily on fossil fuels for their production.
Oh, wow.
Even if we electrify everything we can, those 4 pillars still need oil and gas.
Wow. That's a bit of an aha moment.
Right.
I think a lot of people, myself included, just assume that switching to renewable energy is the key to ditching fossil fuels. But this adds a whole other layer of complexity.
It does.
Even our electric car dream still relies on those pillars
Absolutely.
Being produced with oil and gas.
Yeah, it really underscores how deeply embedded fossil fuels are in our society and how challenging a full transition will be. And we haven't even touched on things like aviation fuel.
Oh, wow.
Where there are currently no viable alternatives.
So those transatlantic flights to exotic destinations aren't going electric anytime soon?
Not anytime soon.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if a complete break from oil and gas is so difficult.
Yeah.
What are the potential pathways forward?
Right.
Are we talking about incremental reductions? Or do we need some radical breakthroughs in material science and manufacturing?
Those are the million-dollar questions.
Yeah.
And ones that we'll definitely dive into further. But before we get there, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another hot-button issue in climate change education.
You mean like how to tell if your textbook is from the Stone Age on climate science?
What?
Because Texas made headlines last year for mandating climate change education for 8th graders, but then rejecting a bunch of textbooks because of their climate change content.
Right.
It seems contradictory, to say the least.
Right. It raises questions about what kind of education is actually happening in classrooms. Apparently, Texas doesn't follow the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS, which emphasize the role of human activity in climate change and the need for solutions.
Wait, hold up. For those of us who aren't curriculum experts, what exactly are the NGSS, and why does it matter that Texas isn't using them?
Good point. It's easy to get lost in the jargon.
Yeah.
So the NGSS are basically a set of guidelines for K-12 science education adopted by numerous states that promote an understanding of how science actually works and how it applies to real-world issues like climate change.
So Texas students are learning about climate change?
Yeah.
But maybe not the full story, not necessarily about how to address it?
Right.
That seems like a big gap.
It is, and it gets even more complicated when you consider that Texas law actually prohibits state funds from being invested in companies that divest from oil, gas, and coal.
Wow. So you weren't kidding about things getting complicated.
No.
It feels like we're peeling back layers of an onion here.
Yeah.
And each layer reveals another challenge. We've got transportation, energy, education, and a whole lot of intertwined interests at play.
Right.
What's next on our deep dive agenda?
Let's tackle another contentious issue. School vouchers. Texas Senate Bill 2, or SB 2, is all over the news. It proposes giving families $10,000 vouchers for private school tuition. Sounds good in theory.
Right.
More choices for parents and students,
Right.
But there are some serious concerns about how this would play out in practice.
I've heard some rumblings about that.
Yeah.
What are the specific concerns? Is it just the usual debate about public versus private education?
It's more nuanced than that. The article points out that most private schools cost way more than $10,000 a year. Often in the $20,000 to $40,000 range.
Wow.
So these vouchers would primarily benefit wealthier families who can already afford the difference.
That makes sense. It wouldn't be much help for lower-income families who are struggling to make ends meet, let alone afford a $30,000 private school tuition. Plus, what about families in rural areas where there might not even be any private schools?
Exactly.
Right.
That's another major issue.
Yeah.
Many rural towns lack private school options entirely.
Right.
So the voucher system would be useless for them.
Yeah.
This raises concerns that SB 2 would exacerbate existing inequalities, both geographically and economically.
It seems like every time we dig into one of these policy issues, we uncover a whole web of interconnected challenges and unintended consequences.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process, but also incredibly fascinating.
It is. It really highlights how important it is to look beyond the surface and consider the broader implications of policy decisions.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for, ready to keep exploring.
I am.
Absolutely. Let's see what other insights we can unearth in this deep dive. I'm all in.
Let's do it.
All right.
It's amazing how these seemingly separate issues, transportation, energy, education, they all tie back into each other.
Totally. It's like we're looking at this giant tapestry and you tug on one thread.
Yeah.
It affects the whole design. But before we get too lost in the big picture, I want to circle back to the school voucher debate. It feels like a classic example of good intentions.
Yeah.
Potentially leading to some not-so-great outcomes.
Exactly. The idea of giving parents more educational choices sounds great on the surface.
Right.
But we have to consider how those choices would impact the overall system.
Right.
The article makes a strong case that SB 2 could end up widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Right. And it makes you wonder about the bigger picture. The role of public education in a democratic society. If we start shifting significant resources away from public schools, doesn't that undermine the idea of providing quality education for everyone, regardless of their background or zip code?
It's a crucial question, and one that policymakers really need to grapple with.
Yeah.
The article doesn't provide any easy answers.
Right.
But it certainly lays out the complexities and potential pitfalls of voucher systems.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even well-intentioned policies can have unintended consequences, especially when you're dealing with a system as large and multifaceted as education.
Okay, so we've got this tension between individual choice and collective responsibility. It seems like that theme keeps popping up whether we're talking about transportation, energy, or education.
Right.
It's like we're constantly trying to find the sweet spot between personal freedom and the common good.
That's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
And it's a tension that's inherent in many policy debates. How do we balance individual rights with the needs of society as a whole?
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all answer, and it often requires some tough choices and compromises.
Speaking of tough choices, let's zoom back in on transportation. We talked about the allure of self-driving cars and the challenges of retrofitting cities built for the automobile.
Yeah.
But what about those bigger, bolder solutions like high-speed rail?
Right.
The maglev train idea still has me daydreaming about futuristic travel.
I know, right? It's such a tantalizing concept.
Yeah.
But as we discussed earlier, those kinds of transformative projects require a massive amount of political will and public investment.
Yeah.
It's not just about the technology itself,
Right.
but also about overcoming bureaucratic hurdles, securing funding, and convincing people to embrace a new way of thinking about transportation.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the wow factor of new technology without acknowledging the real-world challenges of implementation.
Absolutely.
And with a project as ambitious as the maglev train, you're talking about billions of dollars and years, if not decades, of planning and construction.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if we as a society are willing to make those kinds of long-term commitments. Are we content with incremental improvements, or are we ready to swing for the fences and aim for truly revolutionary change?
That's the fundamental question.
Yeah.
It's not just about whether we can do it,
Right,
but whether we're willing to prioritize it and invest in it.
Yeah.
It requires a shift in our mindset from short-term thinking to a longer-term vision.
Totally agree. And speaking of needing a mindset shift, can we circle back to the climate change education conundrum?
Sure.
It just seems so bizarre that Texas would mandate teaching about climate change and then reject textbooks that actually cover it.
It's definitely head-scratching.
Yeah.
It suggests a deep reluctance to fully engage with the scientific consensus on climate change.
Right.
Perhaps due to political or economic pressures.
Yeah.
The article hints that this disconnect might stem from the fact that Texas doesn't use the next generation science standards, which are much more explicit about human-caused climate change and the need for solutions.
Right. We talked about NGSS earlier.
Yes.
And how those standards really emphasize applying scientific knowledge to real-world issues.
Yeah.
It seems like a missed opportunity for Texas students if they're not getting that kind of education.
It is.
But it's more than just a missed opportunity, isn't it? It feels like it's actively hindering their ability to understand and address this critical issue.
Absolutely. It's not just about learning facts.
Right.
It's about developing critical thinking skills and the ability to evaluate evidence and make informed decisions.
Yeah.
If students aren't getting a comprehensive and unbiased education on climate change, they're less likely to be equipped to engage in constructive conversations and advocate for meaningful solutions.
And it's not like we can just ignore the problem and hope it goes away.
Right.
Climate change is happening now.
Yes.
And it's impacting communities all over Texas, from rising sea levels to extreme weather events.
Yeah.
It feels like a disservice to students to not provide them with the knowledge and tools they need to navigate these challenges.
Couldn't agree more. And let's not forget the economic implications.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Texas has a huge stake in the energy industry, and the transition to a cleaner energy future will undoubtedly create winners and losers.
Yeah.
It's crucial for students to understand the complexities of these shifts and the potential opportunities and challenges they present.
Right. It's about more than just science.
Yeah.
It's about economics, politics, social justice.
Yeah.
All these interconnected pieces that shape the world we live in.
Absolutely.
And if students aren't getting a holistic education, that encompasses all those dimensions. How can we expect them to be informed citizens and effective problem solvers?
Exactly. It's about empowering them to be agents of change, not just passive recipients of information.
Right.
And that brings us back to the importance of critical thinking and media literacy skills.
Yes.
In today's world, where misinformation is rampant, students need to be able to evaluate sources, discern fact from fiction, and think for themselves.
Making me want to go back to school and get a crash course in all of this.
I know, right?
It's like you're opening up a whole new way of seeing the world, connecting the dots between issues that I never realized were related.
Right.
And it's not just theoretical,
Mm.
it's directly impacting people's lives right here in Texas.
That's the power of these deep dives.
Yeah.
We're taking seemingly disparate topics
Yeah.
and showing how they're all part of a larger system.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start seeing those connections,
Right.
it's hard to unsee them.
Yeah.
It changes your perspective
Yeah.
and how you approach these issues.
Totally. I'm already thinking about these topics in a completely different way.
Good.
And it's making me wonder,
Yeah.
what can individuals do to create positive change?
Right.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these global challenges and think, what difference can one person make?
Mm-hmm.
But I have a feeling you're going to tell me that we actually have more power than we realize.
You're absolutely right. And that's exactly what we'll explore
Okay.
in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Stay tuned because it's about to get even more empowering.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From self-driving cars to climate textbooks to those 4 pillars of civilization that rely so heavily on fossil fuels. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but that's what makes this stuff so fascinating.
Yeah.
These aren't just abstract policy debates.
Right.
They're shaping the world we live in right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll have a huge impact on the future, too.
Absolutely. And that brings me to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
The role of individuals in all this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to feel powerless when you're talking about issues as big as climate change or energy transitions.
Mm-hmm.
What can one person realistically do?
The question a lot of people ask.
Yeah.
And for good reason, the scale of these challenges can be overwhelming.
Right.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Individual actions multiplied across millions of people
Yeah.
can absolutely make a difference.
Okay.
It's not about waiting for governments or corporations to solve everything.
Right.
We all have a role to play.
So what does that look like in practice?
Okay.
Is it all about making sustainable choices,
Mm-hmm.
like driving less and recycling more?
Yeah.
Those things are important, but I'm guessing it goes beyond that.
You're right. It's bigger than just individual lifestyle changes.
Okay.
It's about being informed citizens,
Uh-huh.
engaging in our communities,
Mm-hmm.
and advocating for the changes we want to see.
Okay.
It's about using our voices and our votes
Right.
to push for policies that align with our values.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
It's about a
Shift in mindset
yeah.
from feeling like a passive bystander
Right.
to realizing that we actually have agency. We can shape the future,
Yeah.
both through our individual choices
Yep.
and our collective actions.
Exactly. Think about those 4 pillars we discussed earlier.
Okay.
Concrete, steel, plastic, and ammonia.
Right.
Those are essential for modern life.
Yeah.
But they also have a huge environmental footprint.
Mm-hmm.
As consumers, we can demand more sustainable products.
Right.
And support companies that are innovating in this space.
Got that.
We could also push for policies that incentivize those innovations and hold corporations accountable for their environmental impact.
So it's not just about what we buy.
Yeah.
It's about demanding better options.
Yeah.
And holding those in power accountable. It's about using our collective voice to drive change.
Precisely. And don't underestimate the power of community engagement.
Yep.
Get involved in local initiatives, support organizations working on issues you care about.
Right.
Talk to your friends and family about these topics. Raising awareness and building a shared understanding is crucial for creating momentum.
It's about building a movement from the ground up.
Yes.
I love that. But I have to admit, sometimes it feels like
Yeah.
those in power aren't really listening.
Right.
How do we make sure our voices are actually heard and that our actions have a real impact?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer.
Right?
But persistence is key.
Okay.
Keep showing up. Keep speaking out. Keep pushing for progress. Vote in every election. Contact your elected officials.
Right.
Support organizations that are fighting for a better future.
Yeah.
The more people who engage, the harder it is for those in power to ignore us.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
It's about staying informed, staying engaged, and never giving up hope.
You got it. And remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
You never know who you might inspire or what kind of change you might set in motion.
That's really inspiring. It's a reminder that we're all in this together and we all have a role to play in creating the future we want to see.
Absolutely.
So to wrap things up.
Okay, let's recap what we've learned today.
Okay.
We've explored some of the most pressing policy challenges facing Texas, from transportation and energy to education and school vouchers.
Right.
And we've seen how these seemingly separate issues are all interconnected,
Yeah.
part of a larger system that shapes our lives in profound ways.
And we've gone beyond simply identifying the problems.
Right.
We've talked about potential solutions, the importance of individual action,
Yeah.
and the power of collective engagement.
Right.
It's been a deep dive in every sense of the word.
It really has. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of these issues and how they connect to the bigger picture. And I'm walking away with a renewed sense of hope
That's great.
and a belief that we can make a difference even in the face of daunting challenges.
That's what it's all about. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And when we understand the complexities of these issues, we're better equipped to navigate them and advocate for positive change. Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the challenges of transitioning away from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Especially considering those 4 pillars that underpin so much of modern life.
Right.
So the question is, what innovative approaches could make those pillars more sustainable? How can we reimagine concrete, steel, plastic, and ammonia for a future that's both prosperous and environmentally responsible?
Yeah.
It's a challenge that requires creativity, collaboration, and a willingness to think outside the box.
It's a challenge worth embracing.
It is.
So keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a better future.
And remember, even smaller ripples can create big waves. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.